Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to, depending on wherever you may live or however you may look at your clock, this early morning or middle of the night bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost you a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to this middle of the night or early morning bonus upload. Shall we? Today's first part of the upload. The Native Americans have myth, and some of them are relatively recent. That is, they arose in the 20th century. UFOologist Artie Sekiller Clark hails from the Native American tribe of Cherokee and Choctaw. She is a professor of history at the University of Montana. Clark lectures on the history of Native Americans and their current plight, as well as their myth and legend, some of which have alien theme. Stories like these differ depending on the tribal group, so it's hard to say if there is any definite connection between them. But there is no doubt that these stories are very strange. Some of them say directly that you can fly away into the sky and travel in a ship along the Milky Way. And when you die, you find yourself in some place, which is also in the Milky Way. And in general, there is a general idea that space plays a big role in the death and afterlife of a person, and that, in fact, people really never die. They just go into some other dimension and can communicate with the living from there, states Clark. According to Clark, there are many legends in her archive that tell about these star people, or entities that came from the sky in flying vessels and taught the Native Americans different wisdom. And there are even stories that these entities could have sexual intercourse with people, and after that, hybrid children were born. They are rarely described as aliens from outer space. Mostly they're called spirits or gods who came to the Native Americans from another kingdom. Clark even wrote a book about such stories entitled Encounters with the Star People, Untold Stories of American Indians. The story, which will be discussed, was told to her by a Native American named Harrison, a member of one of the tribes from the Northern Plains. The story took place in 1945, 2 years before the Roswell incident and the all-American UFO craze. Harrison was only 12 years old at the time. One evening, he was sitting at his grandfather's house when both of them heard a terrible rumble outside, and their home shook like an earthquake. They ran outside into the street and saw their horses rushing away out of fear. In the morning, Harrison's grandfather went to look for the horses, but soon returned home, alarmed. The boy asked him what had happened, and he only told him to follow him. They walked a little into the field, and there the grandfather showed him a large, fresh hole in the ground, at the bottom of which was a large metal object with an open opening on the side. The object appeared to be severely damaged, as if it had fallen from great height. He later said that when he looked inside the object, he saw several humanoid creatures there, which were very tall, at least 2.5 meters. They were dressed in green jumpsuits, and their skin on the free areas of their body was translucent, so that one could see their blood vessels and flesh. The eyes of the creatures were of intermediate color. As they consistently changed color from one to another, the creatures looked very surprised at the sight of a person and even seemed to be afraid of him. They tried to move away from the man, and when he took a step towards them and tried to speak, they suddenly disappeared, disappearing into thin air. However, they did not disappear for good. During the next few days, these strange star people were seen by Harrison and his family near their home. The creatures always kept aloof and disappeared without a trace at the slightest attempt of people to come closer to them. Therefore, people soon gave up their attempts to approach them. They simply watched the star people from the distance and saw that they walked on the ground and picked up something from it, stones, plants, as if collecting samples for study. Harrison's grandfather tried to be friendly with them. He repeatedly called them to enter the house, showed them food several times, offering to try it, and finally it worked. The aliens began to come closer and closer, and then they got in touch with Harrison's grandfather and invited him to visit their ship again, which was still lying at the very large pit. The creatures communicated with Harrison's grandfather using telepathy. When he boarded their ship, they told him about their kingdom, which they described as a very arid and desolate place with a harsh climate. Because of this, the aliens were forced to live in underground cities under large domes. They said that they had visited the Earth thousands of years ago, but very rarely came into contact with people, but only watched them from the side, studying them as people study wild animals. Further, star people told Harrison's grandfather that during the entire time of their arrivals, 2 of their ships crashed on Earth, and that they themselves are now waiting for help from a large mothership, which is somewhere in space. While inside their ship, Harrison's grandfather saw many strange and bizarre-looking devices with technology beyond his understanding. Some time had passed, and one night the Harrison family heard a loud noise, and when they went outside, they saw a huge cylindrical object in the sky which hovered over the field where there was a crater with the damaged ship. When they went to the place in the morning, there was no ship with its strange crew in the pit. Soon the military arrived at this place, cordoning off the entire area and confiscating the house of Harrison's grandfather. Later, they destroyed the house and the entire area adjacent to it, and in its place they created an artificial lake. And I know a lot of you guys will find that interesting, and some may say, hey, this doesn't have anything to do with Dogman, and this is a Dogman channel. Well, no, it's not just a Dogman channel. The name is in there because, I don't know, I put it there. But, as all of you who have listened to this channel know, that I am completely fascinated by all Native American cultures, including my own, but I love their lore, their traditions, everything about them. And I wanted to share this because it talked about, you know, these first Native American lore. It talked about the interbreeding or breeding with gods from outer space and creating hybrid children, which, you know, what are the Nephilim? Not saying that these creatures are Nephilim or anything, but just something different. And at the end, the tail end is, look at what the government did. Hey, a big old cover-up. They just destroyed this poor guy's house, his property, and put a lake there. You know, so that's why I wanted to share. Also, because it's completely, totally interesting and cool. So, moving on. Today's second part of the upload. I'm 37, 36 at the time of this encounter, and have always been interested in the paranormal. I've had a couple of encounters/experiences. I'll enter a situation with an agnostic attitude and instantly develop one of skepticism once I start assessing and evaluating everything. That being said, I do love a good mystery and don't think for a moment that people who believe in such things are lying or stupid. We all have our reasons for believing what we do. I was working 1.5 jobs in 2019. The half was an on-call assistant private investigator, and the main one was a security guard. We mainly did patrols for apartments and a small handful of residential contracts. This particular event took place at 19th Avenue and Camelback, which, if you're from Phoenix, you know is a pretty shady part of town. The apartments I patrolled were just south of there. There were predominantly low-income tenants, half of whom were refugees from all over the globe. The complex was well known in the area for theft, violence, break-ins, drug dealers, and so on. I liked patrolling it because I felt like I was helping people who genuinely needed it, and the vast majority of them were very grateful that I was here. I got to know many of them very well, and we would often talk and shoot the breeze before I had to start making my rounds again. One of the people I talked to was a Native American, who I won't name for obvious reasons. He was often on his balcony getting drunk and high, things which we were supposed to report, but fuck that. As long as you weren't causing any trouble or making a lot of noise, I'm not saying shit about it. And would usually say hi to me when I arrived on post, and we'd talk for a while, then I'd start my shift. Never any real issues with the guy. He liked listening to his music, having a few beers, and having a blunt or two. Seemed like a nice guy. He had a tattoo on his chest of some Kachina dolls, though I have no idea if they play into this encounter or not. Anyway, in the summer of 2019, I was doing my rounds. It was about 8:30 at night. I heard him chanting loudly in his native tongue. I went to see if he was okay. He never did this before. When I got there, he was outside, so I kept doing my patrol until I heard it again, not long after. I went back to his side of the complex and saw him, his pregnant fiancée and his son, who I'd never met before, coming down the stairs, and he looked at me and said, "Hey man, follow me." When I was walking behind them, I saw that what looked like a giant knife in his son's hand, but when we got to the parking lot, I could see it was just a large feather, and his father had 2 smaller ones, maybe from a juvenile eagle. When we entered the parking lot, I saw a Native American woman standing there who I had kicked out earlier for being loud and yelling at a guy who was the roommate of the Native American tenant. I'd seen him before and knew he lived there, but didn't know he was his roommate. I don't remember what they were arguing about this time, but she had 2 of her sons with her now, 10 years old, and maybe a 6-month-old in a stroller. They were going back and forth with each other, and the father and son began taking the feathers and rubbing them on the children's faces while whispering in their language. The mother flipped the fuck out. "Don't you put that fucking evil on my baby, you sick fuck. Fuck you, get the fuck away from my babies," and so on. I was about to step in and tell them to stop when they stood up and said, in a very guilty voice, "We aren't doing anything to hurt your baby. That's why he brought the security guard to make sure everything's okay." To which she replied, "He doesn't know what is going on. Truer words have never been spoken." She then says, "If you guys aren't doing anything wrong, then do it on your pregnant fiancé's belly." And the dad says, "Okay," and turns to his son to whisper something in his ear, and now it's the kid's turn to flip the hell out, and he yells, "You're still frickin' evil. I'm half Christian, and I'm not doing this evil shit, etc., etc., and takes off running. The dad and his fiancée yelled at him to come back, and then he took off after him. I'm stuck there trying to get the lady with the kids to leave, now for their own safety, and then I run after looking for the dad and son. I don't find them, so just assumed that they had left the property, and therefore they weren't my problem anymore. Not long after, I saw fresh blood trail and vomit on the sidewalk and a knife nearby, and walked back to the native guy's balcony, where I could now see him getting bandaged up by his fiancée due to having a huge gash on his forehead. I called the cops. I hated doing that, but now it's serious. They came, I explained everything that had happened, and they knocked on his door, but there was no answer. They told me there was nothing they could do since it was a family issue, and the dad was attacked, didn't want to talk with them, which makes sense, I suppose, from their point of view. No charges were ever filed. The next day I spoke with the manager about the incident. He told me, "Oh, you mean Mike?" Not his real name. "Man, I've been keeping an eye on him. He moved here after he got let out of prison for manslaughter. If any of you are familiar with the process of becoming a skinwalker, you know that one of the big steps is to take one's life or murder. I only saw the guy a few times after, and we never talked about the incident again, but it was always in the back of my mind whenever I saw him. For the record, I don't personally think people can turn into coyotes or weird magical powers. No disrespect intended. However, I do think that some people think they are capable of changing things." Anyway, that's what I wanted to share. I'm really not that knowledgeable about these things, and I'd love to know more. Particularly about the feathers and the Kachina tattoo. I knew a Native American years ago who had a specific tattoo put on him by a family member in case he ever got into prison, so he couldn't be recruited by the Warrior Society, a native prison gang, think their version of the Aryan Brotherhood, and always wondered if they had any hand in the whole skinwalker thing in the Southwest. Cheers. Today's third part of the upload. I was driving home in the summer of '97, midday, no clouds, turning a corner at the bottom of the hill to my street. It's a hard left turn, and opposing traffic frequently miscalculates how much they have to slow down to stay in their lane, especially if they don't look ahead to see if anyone's coming. So I was turning left, looking far left up the hill, when out of the peripheral to my right there was what I could only describe as a large, I mean the size of an SUV creature wrapped around the base of an old tree. It was gripping the trunk about 5 feet off of the ground like a squirrel, covered in long brown hair except for its head, where it was darker and short like a horse's hair. The head was anteater-like, but nowhere near as long or thin in proportion. My abrupt turn spooked it. The dense mane on the back inflated as it sprinted up the tree like a bear. I could see incredible muscle mass ripple under the thick coat, and it shook the entire 4-story tree. The whole sighting happened in about a second while I was focused on taking a turn, so movement is what made me notice it. When I looked in the direction for a brief flash, I saw massive hind legs blast through the bark and propel its torso straight up the trunk, and then nothing. The sheer size and force of it did scare me, but what the fuck element made me stop? I backed up about 20 feet to get a better look at the area, which was the front yard of a house set in the back of the woods. Things were completely normal. I don't think it was something that was actually there then. Or, in retrospect, did I see some sort of cryptid? Today's fourth part of the upload. I used to live in a more rural area of Tennessee growing up. I spent most of my days traipsing around the backcountry with my friends, logging miles of hiking a day. Usually there were 4 of us, and we would venture out, but on this particular day, there were only 2 of us that went. I'll call my friend Tyler. Well, Tyler's family had just moved here from California barely a year before this. We rode our bikes as far as was feasible and hid them while we traversed the hills. We meandered through the woods for hours, joking and playing like we usually did. We got to this kind of clearing, and Tyler was talking animatedly to me, and then just stopped. This was a kid that talked a mile a minute. I don't talk as much, so I was just content listening. And I remember My stomach dropped. I figured there was a snake, but when I turned to look at him, his face was twisted into a silent scream. He was looking behind me and up. He kind of pointed and took off running in the other direction. By this time, I felt the icy grips of terror leeching onto me, but still I turned around. I don't know what it was, but it was tall and hairy and smelled bad. I would have called it a Bigfoot, but it ran like a dog. I lived in rural areas my whole life, and I can say without a shadow of a doubt that I did not see a bear that day. Bears have sounds, I know. They have different running styles than dogs. Bears were a daily sighting depending on what house I was at. I don't know what I saw, but I know enough about life that I don't go telling anyone I know in person about it now. People where I'm from reported similar sightings. Tyler and his family moved back to California less than a month after this incident. He never spoke to any of us, myself and our ragtag bunch again. If we went to his door, he wouldn't answer, or his mom would send us away. A couple years later, I moved up north. I have told nobody besides people I knew in the town that I'm from. Today's final encounter. I'm hoping that there are other people who've experienced this same thing. It involves my brother, and this account is pieced together after becoming involved and after discussing it with other people who remember it, mainly family members. I've not sugarcoated it or added anything. It is exactly as we remembered it. I grew up in a former coal mining town in north of England. To give a little more background, this town is located between the cities of Newcastle upon Tyne and Durham. This area has had its share of UFO activity. This story goes back to when I was 9 years old, back in '97. At the time, I used to help my mom babysit my newborn cousin who lived on the same street. On this particular occasion, it was Saturday night. My brother had decided to come as well. He was 8 years old at the time. It was a normal evening, nothing out of the ordinary. My mom put the baby to bed around 8 p.m. and we started to watch a movie. My dad called to tell me that my mother had forgotten something in the house and asked me to go back and pick it up. I left and then decided to stay with my dad for an hour before going back. Then the phone rang. I answered it as I was the closest to it, and it was my mother who was concerned about my brother who was freaking out. I passed the phone to my dad. He said we would come and get him. As we arrived, we found my brother on the couch, all white and crying in fear. My dad asked him what had happened, but he could only speak gibberish. However, he was able to say, "I never want to stay in this house again. I want to go home." My brother and I shared a room, and I still remember him crying all night. Needless to say, it was a sleepless night for the whole family. My brother never talked about what had happened, and, true to his word, he never slept at my aunt's house again. Several years later, when my brother was about 16, he decided to open up about what had happened that night. We were alone in the house while my parents were on holiday. I asked him, just as I remembered it, and he paused the computer game he was playing, stared at the paused screen, and said, "Mom sent me to check on our cousin, the baby, so I went upstairs." I didn't turn the light on in the living room. The living room light was on, and that was enough, and I went into the baby's room. Everything seemed normal at first, and then I felt it, a strange presence, as if something was behind me. It wasn't a feeling that something was there, but rather an unknown certainty. A heavy breathing sound started, and at first I thought it was a baby snoring, but it was too heavy, sort of like Darth Vader, but way more aggressive. I turned to the door slowly and saw a figure. It was dark, but I could tell that its skin was green on its right side. What scared me the most was the glaring red eyes that were just staring at me. I hid behind the door thinking I was going to die. It just stood there, staring at me through the crack of the door. its head turning to keep track of me with its red eyes. Those red eyes just stared at me. It seemed to stay there for about 20 minutes, and I didn't move, as though I thought it was going to hurt me. Then it just disappeared. I think it may have opened the window and jumped out. I only realized it was gone when the heavy breathing had stopped, and the feeling of terror disappeared. Although my brother had claimed it felt like an incident lasted 20 minutes, he had literally been gone for 1 or 2 minutes. I have to admit, his story is unsettling, and I imagine that people would think this is all made up. It's quite a lot for a 9-year-old to remember, but he claims as he got older he was able to describe it better, as the night has always been on his mind. My aunt was never told this story, but one day I asked her if she had ever seen or heard anything strange in her house, to which she replied, "Once, when your brother was a toddler, he fell down the stairs." When I asked him if he was okay, he replied that a man with red eyes had done it. Although he was very young, he remembers it clearly to this day. He recalls looking back up the stairs to see the figure standing there, just staring at him with those glowing red eyes. So it seems it wasn't the first time he had encountered this creature. My brother also claims to have had dreams about this ever since the babysitting incident. One dream in particular was that he was playing with our Labrador in my mom's home office in the evening. Then out of the corner of his eye he noticed a figure walk past the door in the dark. The dog went crazy, snarling and barking, with all of his hair standing on end, like a dog does when it's trying to make itself look better, bigger, and under threat. But looking out into the darkness to see what the dog was barking at, there they were, those staring red eyes. For years we have tried to make sense of it, doing a lot of internet searches and writing on forums and so on, but have never come up with a conclusion to what it was. I understand that this is a strange one, but it's all true, guys. Well, there you have it, folks. This middle of the night or early morning bonus. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Thank you all for supporting the channel. It is your support, after all, that keeps the channel growing and going, and honestly what gives people a chance and a place to share their experiences and theories judgment-free, just simply treated with the respect that we all deserve. Thank you. Everyone, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for answers, and God bless.